Good afternoon. I'm going to modulate my voice a little bit because we are losing it some. Good afternoon. My name is Vincent Barnes. I am Senior Vice President of Policy Research and Analysis for the Alliance to Save Energy. The recent UN climate change report finds that national climate action plans remain insufficient to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius and meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. Even with increased efforts by some countries, the report shows much more action is needed now to bend the world's emissions trajectory further downward and avoid the worst impacts of climate change. For the US, and consistent with the Paris Agreement, we have committed to reducing net greenhouse gas emissions by 50 to 52% from 2000 levels by 2030. And the US has further committed to reach net zero emissions economy-wide by 2050. Included in these targets is the ambitious goal to achieve 100% carbon-free electricity by 2035. Reaching these targets, has required and will require significant investments in renewable generation capacity that is carbon-free and will additionally require significant infrastructure build-out to support the new generation, including transmission and distribution. However, for the US to meet the identified climate mitigation targets, and other nations as well, I would add, policymakers and climate strategists will need to look beyond the single focus on supply-side solutions. And we must begin to identify climate mitigation strategies focused on energy demand reduction through immediate and accelerated investments in energy efficiency technologies. In fact, based on a recent study by the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory and the Brattle Group, if the US does not move toward immediate and accelerated investments in energy efficiency, demand flexibility, plus electrification, then the energy transition could be prohibitive. According to the LBNL and Brattle study, energy efficiency, demand flexibility, and electrification can reduce buildings sector emissions 91% and cut power systems cost $107 billion annually by 2050. Building efficiency, including demand flexibility, in addition to electrification, provide half of the emission reductions in the building sector, and the remaining half is achieved through power sector decarbonization. Both supply and demand solutions will require a significant ramp-up of the production of materials and products that, if not placed responsibly into the circular economy following the first life cycle, will result in waste and potential environmental hazards that could negate the impact of climate winds and may also have the disadvantageous impact on efforts to ensure that the energy transition is just. This is of particular concern for marginalized communities and maturing economies who often bear the burden associated with material waste. The discussion today will chart the energy transition focused on renewables and demand-side solutions as strategies to address climate change. And we will then identify pathways beyond original life cycles of related materials and products and strategies to ensure that the transition effectively includes the circular economy. We have a number of demand and supply side panelists with us today, but before we get started, I want to introduce Diala Hawila, Program Officer for the International Renewable Agency, IRENA, who will lead us with a slide presentation.
Thank you very much. So I'm Diala Hawila from the International Renewable Energy Agency. I focus on policy and finance, so we track investments in the energy transition and the policies that lead to these investments. But today I'm going to give a broader perspective of the outlook of where the energy mix needs to be by 2050 in order to stay within 1.5 degrees scenario, in the 1.5 degree scenario. So as you can see here on the left side, this is the energy mix in 2020. Right next to it is the energy mix that we need by 2050 to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. So this is what we call in IRENA the 1.5 degree scenario. So the first thing that we see, and as was mentioned by Vincent, the first thing we see is that this rectangular shrinks. So this is energy efficiency and conservation, one of the main technological avenues. So our whole energy consumption will have to be reduced significantly. And then the next thing we see, which is very obvious, fossil fuels, which for now account for 63% of the consumption, will have to be reduced to 12% by 2050. In IRENA, we also consider electrification one very important pathway, so electrifying end uses. For now, electricity accounts for 22% of the energy consumption. This will have to increase to 51%. Today, 28% of electricity comes from renewables. In the future energy mix, it should be 91% renewable based. We see a large role for hydrogen, among it mainly green hydrogen, so hydrogen produced from renewable power. And we see also 16% will come from modern biomass use. So what we call modern biomass is mainly sustainable bioenergy use. So this is this is how the energy sector will have to look like by 2050 if we want to stay within 1.5. So here we see, sorry, it's a bit small, but here we see the main indicators. So where we are today versus where we need to be. So we start with renewables. Up we look at renewable electricity. Below it, renewables for direct uses for heat and transport. Obviously, we all know that in electricity, we're doing much better than other end uses. So on the one side, we need to do better in end uses, but on the other side, since electrification is a main pathway, this is not very bad news. So what you can see, I think, clearly on the screen is this gauge at the right side. So you see in most of them, we are not where we need to be. So we need to do much better in most of the indicators. And as I mentioned, the only one we're doing relatively okay with is investments or deployment of renewables for power. So these are the investments that are going to be needed in order for us to achieve 2050. So on the left side, we have what we call the planned energy scenario in IRENA, which is if all the policies and targets put in place today were to be realized, we would need an investment of $103 trillion cumulatively between now and 2050. But if we were to achieve 1.5 degrees, this takes us up to $150 trillion. So this is on average, if we divide it by the number of years left, this is an average of 5 trillion per year in energy transition, because you can see there's still some fossil fuel investments. So energy transition related investments have to be around 5 trillion a year. Also, you can see here where those investments are mainly concentrated. Of course, renewables for electricity and direct uses, and also power grids and flexibility. We need to invest a lot in grids. We need to invest a lot in energy efficiency. And those are all the investments that will be needed. So looking at past trends, so we said around 5 trillion needs to be invested in the energy transition related technologies. How have we been doing so far? So in 2022, which was a record-breaking year, we invested 1.3 trillion. So we need to do much more. We're talking about the scale of tripling to quadrupling investments. Investments so far continue to focus on renewable energy and energy efficiency, although we saw that last year there was a great uptake in electrification of transport. So we saw a lot of investments in electric vehicles, the infrastructure that is needed. But obviously in all technologies, we need to do much more. Now focusing a bit more on renewables, so zooming in on renewables, where we are today. In 2022, the world invested around $500 billion, so $500 billion in renewable energy. We need to be at around 1.6, so we need to more than triple. And every year where we don't deliver on that average annual target, we are adding more to the years to come. So we need to speed up, and we need to start by addressing all the challenges that are there to attracting investments in renewables. Another thing we see here is that most of the investments in renewables is concentrated on PV. So solar PV attracted around 43% of investments in 2020, offshore wind 35%, onshore wind 35%, and offshore wind 12%. So we see that although investments are picking up in renewables, one, they are not enough, and two, they are focused on certain technologies that are perceived as mature, that are able to attract investments. A second piece of a bit bad news, and this is, I think, one of the most important slides, is that when we look at the investments per regions and per countries, we see that they are increasingly concentrated in given countries and regions. So when we look at the blue line, which is the biggest line, East Asia and the Pacific, obviously this is mainly China. And then followed by North America, which is the US, and then all of Europe. So together, China, US, and Europe account for around more than 80% of global investments, which means that 50% of the world's population is receiving 15% of global renewable energy investments. And those populations are mainly residing in areas that lack access to energy, where renewable energy is important to make energy affordable, reliable, and secure. So this is another challenge. It's not only a matter of achieving a target, it's also a matter of distributing renewable energy in a more equitable and a more fair way. So in order to do that, we need, in IRENA, we look at three pillars. We look at infrastructure, policies, and regulatory enablers, and of course the availability of skills and local capacity. But in this endeavor, it is very important, we talk a lot about the importance of public investments. So public investments are needed where private capital doesn't flow automatically, either to reduce the risks to attract private capital or to address larger barriers. So private investments can go into infrastructure, building the grids that are going to be needed, the electric vehicle charging stations. We need obviously policies, regulations, and investments that will need to fund these policies. And of course, skills and capacities are very important, especially when we are looking at such a large energy transition. There are a lot of benefits that can be reaped, a lot of job creation, businesses, and all those will need policies to develop local capacities so that we can localize some value chains so that the communities that host renewable energy projects can benefit from their socioeconomic advantages. So thank you very much. This is it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Diala. I will now introduce our first panel this afternoon, entitled Charting the Energy Transition and the Role of Renewables and Energy Efficiency Technologies. Our first panel will be moderated by Anna Freeman, Policy Director of Decarbonization at the Clean Energy Council, and Anna will be joined by 4 panel members, beginning with Paula Glover, President of the Alliance to Save Energy, Bill Kent, Executive Director, Association of Energy Engineers, John Titchen, Director, Goldwind Australia, and Ahmed Idris, Director, Environmental Policy at Capital Power Corporation. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vincent, and good afternoon, everyone. Fantastic to be here, and thank you, Diala, for that wonderful opening presentation. It really sets the scene for what it is that we're going to talk about this afternoon. It is a mammoth task that we need to achieve as a globe over the next 3 decades and less. And we've brought together a very diverse panel, which Vincent's mentioned, both in terms of the parts of the energy ecosystem that we represent, but also in terms of geographies, with panellists from the northern and the southern hemispheres. And as you might be able to hear from my accent, I'm one of the southerners. I am the Policy Director for Decarbonisation at the Clean Energy Council, and we are the peak body for the renewable energy sector in Australia. We represent over 1,000 member companies working across solar, wind, energy storage, renewable hydrogen, and I have to say that the transition that is happening in Australia at the moment is nothing less than a seismic shift in our energy system. We've got famously, if not infamously, vast reserves of gas and coal in Australia. Fossil fuels have been very much at the centre of the way we have run our country, but that is now beginning to change. Until about half a dozen years ago, only 15% of Australia's electricity came from renewables, and now we are sitting at almost 40% by the end of this year, and that's happened in 6 years. So it's been really fast. And now our federal government has committed to has set a target to double that, more than double, to 82% by 2030, which will support a greenhouse gas emissions reduction target of 43% by 2030. Achieving that goal of going to 40% to 82% in the next 6 to 7 years is going to be not impossible, but nothing short of a Herculean task, and I'm sure it's one that everyone around this table will feel in their own sectors and ecosystems that they occupy. In the next 6 to 7 years in Australia, we will need to deploy around just over 40 gigawatts of renewable electricity generation, so wind and solar primarily, across our main grid, over 20 gigawatts of rooftop solar generation, and another 20 gigawatts or so of bulk and distributed energy storage. We're going to need to quickly learn how to operate a very large, and in Australia's case, a very skinny grid, electricity grid, on very high levels of electricity, renewable energy penetration, and specifically variable. Many other countries that have achieved very high rates are typically backed by hydro, and we do not have that in quite so larger quantities in Australia. And so we're very much at the cutting edge of learning how to integrate high degrees of variable renewables. We'll need to leverage that renewable energy powered system to decarbonise final energy use across the economy wherever we can, buildings, transport, business and heavy industries. We need to build the workforces and supply chains who can manufacture, design, install, operate and maintain the new clean energy systems of the future. And along the way, and this is possibly the thing that I think is exercising most minds in Australia at the moment, it's how do we bring the community with us as part of that journey. I share all of this not to say that Australia is in any way particularly special. We are just one country case study of many, and it provides a bit of an overview of the many pieces of the puzzle that we all need to put together in a short amount of time to meet our climate and energy targets. So in today's discussion, we're going to discuss some of these themes, and I'm pleased to be joined by a very diverse panel of speakers, as I've mentioned, all experts in their own right across many different facets. So immediately to my left is Ahmed Idris, Director of Environmental Policy at Capital Power, which is a publicly listed North American power producer headquartered in Edmonton, Canada, with over 9 gigawatts of power plants across Canada and the US. Welcome, Ahmed.
Thank you.
Great to have you. To Ahmed's left is Paula Glover, President of the Alliance to Save Energy, which is a bipartisan, not-for-profit coalition of business, government, environmental and academic leaders advocating to advance federal energy efficiency policy, and who played an instrumental role in advancing sweeping energy policies such as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, which is something that us in Australia can only look on in awe of. It's such a consequential policy for everybody. To Paula's left is Bill Kent, Executive Director for the Association of Energy Engineers, which is a global network of more than 30,000 energy engineers who focus on energy efficiency in the commercial and industrial sectors with a vision to, I'm going to say it for you, Bill, sorry, okay, lead the global energy community to meet the challenges of a clean and sustainable future. Very lofty and important goal. And finally, to my far left, John Titchen, Director of Goldwind Australia, I hope he doesn't mind me using this term, a veteran of the Australian renewable energy sector, who has been at it on renewables since I probably was a teenager, I'd say. And in that role, he has led the development of more than 1.5 gigawatts of wind and solar projects across Australia, enough to power the equivalent of 1 million homes. And Goldwind is also, of course, a wind turbine manufacturer with equipment deployed in 27 countries around the world. So please welcome my panel. I'm going to begin by asking each of you briefly. I'm going to give you no more than 45 seconds each, so just watch the time. How would you characterise the current state of the energy transition? I'm going to mix it up. Let's start with Paula.
Sure. So in 45 seconds, and very briefly, I would say we are building the plane while we are flying the plane. As you outlined in your introduction, there are so many different balls in the air that we have to get right. We have to get capacity building right. We have to get in the U.S. These billions of dollars that we have invested in efficiency, we have to spend that right. We have to engage with communities in the right way. And so there's a lot of things that we have to get right in a very short time period. And so that's how I would describe it. But we are flying the plane. So we shouldn't be afraid of the fact that we're building it, because the plane is still flying. It's still in the air.
Well, that's a relief. Ahmed, to you, what's your experience and how would you currently characterise the current state of the energy transition?
Thanks, Anna. So basically what we shouldn't forget that actually we should build clean, reliable, affordable electricity. And that idea of affordability and reliability is very key to the process. In the future, we're going to see more of electrification coming around. And the introduction of renewable is very important, very vital to the process. But we need to make sure that we have a reliable system. We don't want that renewable energy is coming to the system. However, it actually might compromise the reliability. So we have to make sure that, again, it's actually going to be not one solution, but it's going to be all of the above. So it's going to be renewable, batteries, carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, all the above solution that is needed.
All right, so does that mean that you're confident that it is currently going well? Is that what I should deduce from your response there? How would you characterise it?
I think we're on the right track. Is it going well? No, we are not going well, but it is on the right track.
Good. All right. Bill?
Yes, well, I think we stand with a huge opportunity. I would not say a challenge, but an opportunity. We've been doing efficiency, energy efficiency for decades, and I can say it's certainly great to be at COP and to see the focus on doubling energy efficiency, which we need. Certainly a huge focus on policy, financing. We need tremendous financing, but also we need much more expansion of the workforce across the board, from underserved, those, just transition, all the way up through energy engineers. So we're making progress. We have a tremendous way to go. I love Paula's analogy. We're flying the plane as we're building it. But we have an opportunity, and I'm excited for us to be a part of it.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to come back to your comments there about energy efficiency in our next question. But finally, John, the last word. How would you currently characterise the state of the energy transition?
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I'd say hugely energised, actually. I think there's a huge amount of... Yeah, well, I think it's a suitable pun. A really huge amount of energy in the industry. We've seen it at the COP here. There's a very diverse set of activities, all pushing in the same direction. So I think that is definitely the case, and I think we've got suitable levels of capability, but deploying them effectively, I think can be challenging. So there are barriers that we need to work through. We need to find ways to streamline. We need to overcome impediments. We need to adjust policies and approaches. And I would like to refer to Ahmed's comment about cost effectiveness. Renewable energy is a very cost-effective solution. It's happening as a result of sort of market forces, but I don't think quickly enough. And so I think acceleration is needed, barriers removed, and more progress needs to be made more quickly.
All right, well, we're excited, we're energised, we're optimistic, but we're also slightly scared. To the next question. Last week, we saw 118 countries, it might be more than that now, that have signed on to the pledge which Vincent mentioned about tripling the world's installed energy generation capacity to at least 11,000 gigawatts by 2030 and doubling the global annual rate of energy efficiency improvements. I'm going to come to the energy efficiency team on the table here. What difference does this make? I often hear my friends and colleagues in the Australian energy efficiency sector refer to themselves as the poor cousins of the energy transition. Is this important to have this target up in lights in this way?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's transformative. And I would probably agree with your Australian colleagues that it does feel like we are Cinderella's stepsisters that nobody really loves until the floor needs to be mopped, and then here we are. But I think, look, in the United States, we have an investment of close to $50 billion in efficiency when you think about tax credits, rebates, and straight investment. And so it's a transformative amount of money and a huge commitment. But I think more importantly, we have a focus, I think, across the globe about this just energy transition. And this idea that we are centering communities first, and that we are centering those communities that are the least of us first, I think really does speak volumes for how important efficiency can be, not just for climate, because that's one piece of it, but to Ahmed's point, when we talk about grid resiliency, that is, efficiency has a big role to play there. If we're talking about affordability to customers, efficiency has an enormous role to play there. And if we're talking about building economic growth, jobs, and wealth, that also really sits firmly in efficiency. And so this is a transformative moment, I think, for us.
Yeah, very much anchored in a mission of social justice as well as greater energy productivity. Bill, anything to add to Paula's comments then?
Well, I mean, I think it's certainly transformative. I know, 2 years at COP, energy efficiency was not even mentioned, and the fact that we have a huge focus here and in the U.S. is, it's just very significant and transformative, and there's so many benefits besides energy efficiency. Yes, we have been the kind of the stepchild, if you will. One thing we're seeing also is, with efficiency, with the integration of renewables, and Ahmed mentioned it, is reliability. I was with a large group recently and asked, what's most important with your energy? Is it that it be green and clean? Is it the price? Or is it the reliability? And I expected maybe an equal distribution, and it was overwhelming that it was reliability was number one. And so I think, energy engineers and all of us, as we transition very quickly, I think reliability has to be at the forefront.
John Titchen at the end of the desk, the tripling of renewable electricity and that goal, will this be important in some way, do you think, just even if it's in the text?
I think it is really important, and all of these countries making the commitment. Industry looks at what countries say and take it seriously, and so investment and effort follows these sorts of commitments, and it might be that the precise policies and mechanisms take some time to flow, but you can anticipate that they will be coming because the countries are making these commitments. So yes, I do think it's very significant. I look back at the IRENA presentation earlier, and it does show nicely how the electrification, the introduction of additional renewable energy dovetails with energy efficiency. We get a more energy efficient system by bringing the renewables into the system, by electrifying processes that didn't exist previously. And we need to triple the amount of electricity by 2050, more than. We need to triple the share of renewable energy in that electricity by 2050. So tripling our current amount of renewable energy by 2030, well, that's another tripling, a shorter term one, but overall, it's interesting to see that the primary energy consumption in 2050 is expected to be less than now. So these things fit together in hopefully an optimal way if we get it right.
Yes.
And, to be, cost effective. The reliability, I do think we need to look at very carefully over coming years, probably not even decades. That will be a need for great focus. And I guess that can be achieved both centrally but also in a distributed manner.
It's an important part of the social compact, isn't it, in the transition, is to maintain that reliability as we go. Ahmed, your business, Capital Power, is a microcosm, I think, when I look at it, in terms of the energy transition itself. You've got almost 30 facilities, I think, maybe more,
Yeah.
and 7.5 gigawatts of installed capacity, or 9. I think it's
9.3.
9. Sorry, error. Across the US and Canada, and you've got a real mixture of technologies. You've got gas-fired power generation. I think you've got landfill gas, wind, solar and bioenergy plants. How is the shape of your business transforming in response to our net zero goals? Because clearly a business like yours will need to change.
So thanks for that, Anna. So basically, Capital Power has the commitment to be net zero by 2045. So we are one of the companies that actually moved from 2050 to 2045 during last COP. The one important thing that we have to remember that electricity depends to a great on the market that they are operating in. So there are some markets that actually have the luxury or they have the resource endowment, like having a hydro or like having a nuclear power. There are areas that actually don't have that one. So for example, in Alberta where we operate, we don't have large hydro nuclear. So in the interim, how are you gonna get the transition from the electricity into a net zero? Then actually in this case you have to get to rely on the CCS. So we are right now in the process of having a shovel-ready project, a CCS project, on one of the largest natural gas, 1,300 megawatt with the CCS. That's in the shovel-ready. We're still working with the government on the finance on that thing. There is another thing, again, about that we shouldn't lose in the discussion, is actually the importance of the taxonomy, and actually how you have a clear understanding of the carbon price. And that actually is very important because that will unleash the coming or the emerging technologies. Small modular nuclear reactors. This is going to be the future. Large batteries that are actually can operate more than 10 hours or for days. You need that. How are you going to get that one if you have some kind of a clear carbon pricing mechanism? So Canada has a clear carbon pricing mechanism at least to 2030. There is an ITC or innovative tax credit system that actually can get the capital. We look at the US as well, the IRA at the US, that actually has already committed $370 billion for climate change. So all these things are important that actually can help you to transition. The one important thing as well is that, again, I have to reiterate that again, is actually we have to rely on all the above solutions. We shouldn't be thinking we're going to solve the issue with one silver bullet. There is a mix of generation that you have to deal with. It's actually, and that actually we shouldn't forget, for example, modernization of the grid. That's a very vital to the process. So with Capital Power, as I said again, we are looking at all the above solution between small modular nuclear reactor, CCS, renewable batteries, you name it.
All right, well, that's very interesting because in Australia at the moment we're having quite a different conversation about nuclear, and that is that it will not actually serve us any purpose before 2030, really, because it'll take so long to build it. So I really think the mix of solutions also depends on the geographies, the markets, and I think also the history. I think I see France, for example, is talking about increasing the share of nuclear, and they've obviously got a long tradition of nuclear in that country.
Can I add one point here?
Briefly.
So it's actually, I completely agree with you on that. That's actually small modular reactor is not going to come by 2030. That's what's actually looking for the transition of the CCS, is to bridge that gap till you get to the nuclear modular, small modular reactor.
All right. Well, these goals that we've just talked about, the tripling of renewable energy capacity and the doubling of energy efficiency, of course, could just be words unless there's actually policies. to support them. And to the North Americans on the panel, possibly the most consequential policy, if you can put it in the singular, because it's so many policies wrapped into one, that we've seen introduced over the past year is the Inflation Reduction Act. And I'm interested in hearing from Paula and Bill briefly about what changes have flowed from that policy for your respective sectors. What lessons should other economies draw? So there's two questions wrapped up there.
Well, I'll start. So Paula is on the policy side, but from someone that lives in the U.S. and is fortunate enough to be able to participate in these are going to be just huge because it's a once-in-a-lifetime investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency, something we've never seen before. And so there's just a huge focus on energy efficiency, renewable energy, climate impact, and also a huge focus on justice and equity and bringing everyone along in a just energy transition. So it really, hits multiple areas, and I wish that every country in the world would make such an investment. It's going to really change, the nature of our electric, and energy supply in the U.S.
And I think I'll build off of what Bill was talking about in terms of a just transition, because that is embedded in our policy as well. So we have a separate policy called Justice 40, which requires that 40% of the benefit of these investments must go to and be seen by these very specific communities. That's enormous, because what it says then is that you can't just make a promise that you're going to engage with the community and kind of move on. The money is tied to that. And another policy that I'll add to the IRA, and then obviously BIL, is actually the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund that comes out of the EPA. And that's really critical in two different ways. One, it makes and identifies efficiency as an enabling technology. And so of the $27 billion in that fund that is directed towards solar for all, it does require that you look at efficiency first. And so if you think about the conversation we're going to have after this panel about the circular economy and no waste, it is really important that we build things that are on efficient homes, and then you add rooftop solar. That because we want to reduce waste. We don't want to be building things that are bigger than we need. We don't want to be doing more mining than we are going to have to do. And so we have to be thinking very deeply about that. At the same time, that fund also requires that 40% of the dollars must be spent in those communities. And that is very different than 40% of the benefits. A direct investment in community, and those communities, again, who are more impacted by climate change than anybody else. And so as I think about the Global South, what I hope is that as we are making investments in the Global South, we build up right. We don't build fast, but we build right, which means that we use, again, efficiency as the enabling technology, and then you add everything else, so that in the future, as we grow and our demand increases, we are not now still having a negative impact on the environment because we weren't thinking about these things on the front end.
I think really that's one of the most striking things about the policy as we've sort of digested it over the course of the last year is just how integrated and it's a beautiful piece of fully integrated policy in the way that it's really built the social transition into the incentives as well for change. I'm now going to go to John Titchen. Goldwind has got investments in many markets around the world. We've just heard about the Inflation Reduction Act. We know that there is, I guess, some tension about the particular approach that has been taken by the North Americans. What do you think should be the policy principles, or what do you think are some of the important policy principles we should consider when we're thinking about how we are going to accelerate investment?
Thanks, Anna. So to accelerate investment, we need to provide confidence for the parties that are undertaking risky development work and ultimately making very substantial capital investments. So there's, as a business, we've installed 105 gigawatts of wind power, mainly in China, but a substantial amount in Australia, North America, Asia, Africa, etc., Middle East. So what attracts us is being able to predict that there's going to be a return on the investment of effort. Our purpose is to contribute renewable energy and help mitigate the effects of climate change. So that's our purpose, but in order to be a sustainable business, we need to be able to predict that we're going to get a return on the investment that investors have made. So we talked about the tripling up. That provides a very top level picture. At the next level down, what are the country targets that are being put in place? So specific targets. As you outlined, Anna, we've got this 82% renewables by 2030 in Australia. Other countries have got different targets. But then below that, we need the mechanisms so that you can see what the chances of the investments that you're making in development have of generating a return. So that sort of predictability, it's not certainty, it's not investment certainty, it's being able to forecast and trust that there's a way of getting that investment. So I think that's really important, but then there are barriers that need to be addressed. And so in current context, things like the planning processes can be an impediment to the rate of progress. It's a bit complicated. I heard a session earlier in the week, the concept of one planning organisation having carriage of a planning process rather than a multitude. There's a strong correlation between the number of entities involved and the rate of progress. Not surprising, really. So simplifying down things like that. On the grid side of things, the security question. How do you make these investments securely? It's something that's very sensitive for those responsible for the power system security, for reliability of supply. So they need to be careful, but sometimes it gets overly complicated and becomes an impediment. So how do you speed that up? And then going back to the social licence point, how do you develop the grid? Developing the grid is a big footprint on our lands, and bringing people along with that, and I guess finding a way of industry and governments working together with the community to facilitate those developments is really important.
All right, well, we need to keep moving along quickly because we do have another panel following us and there's a lot more ground to cover. Ahmed, very quickly, any last things to add in terms of what matters to you when you look ahead and you think about, we're going to change the shape of our business over the next 20 years. You've got 20 years, you've said. Yeah. What's going to matter to you, I guess, and what's most important?
The important thing for us is clarity on the carbon pricing. That is very critical. So, for example, in Alberta, Alberta has the highest penetration of renewable energy in Canada. Alberta has basically had a carbon pricing since 2007, and it's very clear for us. It's actually outpaced any province in Canada. The second thing, what is holding our CCS project right now is that we don't have a clarity on the carbon pricing beyond 2030. So we need to de-risk the carbon policy. For us, this is the pivotal to unleash any innovation and any transition to new technology.
Yeah, right. So we're really hearing long-term sort of visibility and predictability of the settings that are going to will make the difference for our large-scale investments. Paula and Bill, we heard in Diala's presentation on the World Energy Outlook that electrification is going to be a critical strategy for delivering energy productivity improvements and phasing out fossil fuels. How would you say we are tracking in the uptake of electrification? And I always look at the US, possibly more so now China, as a bright light in terms of electrification for EVs and vehicles. But in the US, obviously, I think there was a number of incentives within the IRA to incentivise the shift to electrification, increasing standards and regulations, but sure, a package of other things. How are we seeing consumers respond to that at the moment?
I think consumers, I would say half and half. I don't know that all consumers really know the direction that we're going in. And I think it goes beyond the IRA. So I would also say, right, the bipartisan infrastructure law is a piece of this conversation. The CHIPS and Science Act is actually also a piece of this conversation. So there's a series of laws and bills that are in place to get us there. And as we describe it, or certainly as I describe it, we're going through an industrial revolution in the United States. And what we're trying to do is, electrification is one of those tools, and we will get there, but we're also really trying to be transformative in nature and bring people along and understanding that as we phase out fossil fuels, we've got to consider the capacity of people and communities to move them into other places. So there are all of these things that are happening at the same time, and the policies, you can't really look at them in isolation. And then I think to the larger electrification issue we have to transform our grid in a really meaningful way. And we often talk about the transmission grid, but we actually also have to transform our distribution systems. And we haven't started talking about how are we going to get those investments at the local utility level so that we can adopt more electric vehicle chargers, so that we can do these things that we want to. And so it's kind of a twofer. There is the transmission grid and building out that transmission grid and the challenges that are a part of that. And then there's a distribution grid, which is really the most meaningful piece. And I think when we address that, you'll start to see more consumers at that level really kind of understanding what's going on.
Yep. We might, Bill, move on to another question that I'd like to come to you at, just mindful of the time. We've got about 3 minutes left. You represent, in your role, 30,000 energy engineers who focus on energy efficiency in the commercial and industrial sectors. Do we have the solutions and workforce now that we need to meet the goal of doubling the energy efficiency as hoped?
Well, I think the answer is a short no. We survey engineers in the industry annually, and with this year's survey, more than 75% feel there's currently a shortage of workers, and of those that surveyed also, approximately 50% are going to be retiring in the next 5 to 10 years. So with the retiring workforce, with an expansion of the industry, we have a shortage of, engineers, energy engineers, and even across the full spectrum of energy efficiency and even renewable energy. And that's just going to continue to be an opportunity for us in the coming years.
How do we track them then, Bill?
How do we track them? How do we increase this? I think it really involves community engagement at the lowest level, building awareness in the young 5-year-olds, the 16-year-olds, making energy efficiency, renewable energy, an attractive career, building more curriculum through the university systems, and really, just engaging more of them as we move forward to try and address the demand.
Fantastic. Well, if it's any comfort, it's something that we are also struggling with in Australia. We've just launched a net zero careers campaign. And, just as one example, we need 30,000 electricians by 2030, additional electricians. And if it's a 4-year apprenticeship, how do we get those people into those apprenticeships now? It's quite a task. So I think it is definitely something that all economies will be grappling with over the coming years. I'm going to finish with a question, so I'm going to have to cut short the long number of other questions that I had. And it's really about that, one of the first things that I mentioned in my opening remarks about the importance of engaging communities in the transition. We're trying to affect a major economic and societal change in a very short space of time, and it's going to have an impact on all of our lives in different ways. What approaches do you all, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds each, what approaches do you think we need to look at to ensure that we maintain community support over that transition?
So the important thing is to work with them on the benefits and clarify the benefits of the transition or the importance of the transition. And the other thing as well, it's important to convey to them that's actually the transition from an oil and gas into new renewable energy is not a threat. It's actually, there is a mechanism to have the just transition.
So better communication and of the benefits. Paula?
Yeah, I would say improved communication and education, but at the end of the day, there's one planet. There is actually no success if you don't bring communities along. We don't have a choice, and so I think it's about intentionality and being really deliberate and showing up often and meeting people where they are.
Bill?
I think we talked a lot about, top down, maybe bottom up for each of us as individuals. I would ask each of you and challenge you, easy things. Do we have all, LED bulbs in our homes? Do we all have programmable thermostats? Are we driving EVs? It's getting more challenging, right? Are we fully electric in our homes where we live? And, you know, we all flew from around the world. Do we have purchase offsets for this trip or for our travels throughout the year? So I think we can serve as role models within our communities, our families, you know, and that's one thing we can all do.
Champions of change. That's
Champions
what
of
everyone
change,
needs to become a champion of change. John Titchin, last word.
I certainly agree with all I've heard so far, so I won't recover that. But I think in addition, we do have impacts with large projects on local communities, and I think that should be acknowledged and be addressed. There can be compensation, there can be ways of engaging, there can be local benefits that are derived and delivered locally. So I think for the large-scale sector, that's important, as well as all the other things that have been mentioned. Communication certainly seems to be important, so everyone knows what journey we're on.
Our Federal Treasurer in Australia has been saying over recent months that the real test for us is to ensure that communities are the beneficiaries and not the victims of change, and that's really, I think, our big task along the journey. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. Thank you to our panellists, and back to Vincent.
Products and materials that lead the energy transition, including both supply and demand sides, will have a life cycle potentially resulting in substantial waste and harm, if not recycled and responsibly placed back into the economy. In fact, thanks, Phil. In fact, on the demand side, there are proposals to replace the equipment before the end of the life cycle as a necessary policy to ramp up efficiency gains and decarbonization. So with this in mind, our next panel will focus on building the circular economy, targeting and demand side technologies. Our second panel will be moderated by Jamaica Gale, Director of Sustainability and Environmental Affairs for the Plant-Based Product Council. Jamaica will be joined by Emmanuel Palo Securo, Director, Government Relations of Cargill, Kevin Rabanovich, Global Vice President of Sustainability and Chief Climate Officer for Mars Incorporated, Helen Walter Terrioni, Global Decarbonization Lead at Train Technologies, and Kolja Hughes, Chairman, E5, and also of the European Business Council for Sustainable Energy. Jamaica.
Thank you very much, Vincent. So I think we are missing one of our panelists right now, but she'll catch up when she joins us. So again, my name is Jamaica Gale. I'm the Director of Sustainability and Environmental Affairs for the Corn Refiners Association and the Plant-Based Products Council. We're based in DC, and we represent organizations and companies that are committed to advancing a circular economy and who are helping support the increased adoption of plant-based products. So this is consumer packaging and products that are made from a bunch of different renewable inputs like corn and soy and hemp and algae. So this has been a really, really insightful and interesting conversation so far, and we're excited to transition to that second portion and talk a little bit about circular economy. So renewable energy and efficiency measures are really critical pieces of the puzzle, and I think it's important to recognize that they alone cannot fully address the challenges that we are facing and our planet is facing. We really need to rethink not only how we produce energy, but also how we produce and consume and waste in our current system. So this really means reshaping everything from how we grow, manufacture, and package products to how we develop and utilize energy resources, infrastructure, and buildings. And demand-side industries play a really important role in this through innovative product design, reduced waste generation and efficient resource use, these industries can really lead the way that we are fostering a circular economy. And I'm very fortunate to be joined here today by just a couple of individuals who are actively working towards these goals and more. So I'm a strong believer that these folks can introduce themselves better than I can. So I'm going to ask you all to just give a brief introduction of yourself and a little bit about your organization in answering this first question that I have. And maybe we'll start with Emmanuel at the end. But with that said, could you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about Cargill and its role in the circular economy.
Yes, sure. Thanks, Jamaica. So I'm Emanuele Sicuro. I'm part of the government relations team at Cargill. I'm based in Brussels. And my focus is really on following up on the developments on climate, energy, and environment policy. European environment policy, of course, European climate, energy, and environment policy. So I guess you may know Cargill as one of the largest agriculture commodities traders in the world, but what I'm here today to talk about to all of you, is how Cargill is actually a circular bioeconomy player. And what we do, how we are working with farmers to produce more biomass, the process, and the ingredients innovation that we are applying to food and feed, and also like to close the circle, how we are serving industrial and energy customers as well. So.
Thank you so much. Then I will turn it next to Kolya. If you could tell us a little bit just about yourself, your organization that you're representing today, and your industry's role in the circular economy.
Okay, my name is Kolya Kruse. I'm the chairman of the European Business Council for Sustainable Energy and Materials. We used to call ourselves as the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, but about 10 years ago we started discussing at the COPs an additional very important topic and started discussions about materials, because we cannot think energy alone without taking a closer look at where the energy goes and how it is linked to the production of materials, and especially where the process-bound CO2 emissions in material production comes from. So we started thinking all of this together, and meanwhile we have been supporting a lot of small enterprises who have been developing new materials that can even become CO2 negative, carbon negative. Just as a fallback, if cement and steel and aluminum alone cannot solve this huge task to become CO2 neutral. So that's in essence what we do and why we are here.
Wonderful, thanks so much. Kevin.
Yeah, very happy to be here. Thanks for the invite. You can see my titles up there, so I won't read them. So for anyone that doesn't recognize the name Mars, we're one of the world's largest food companies. Hopefully everyone does. But so we're in snacking, so confectionery products, and then also pet care, pet food and pet services. And then we also have a food business, human food business. So we operate all over the world. We've got about 140 factories scattered around the world and sell pretty much everywhere. And we source raw materials pretty much everywhere. So very much a global business. And, we've had a sustainability program in place since 2007. It's continued to grow and evolve. And it has many facets. We have a net zero commitment. We have land commitments, water commitments, circularity commitments on our packaging. But really the thing that's maybe relevant to our program, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we go, is the motivation behind our program is we are part of a global economy, which is part of a global ecosystem, and basically we won't succeed as a business in a either failing economy or a failing environment. And so really what drives our interest in this space is we want to be successful long-term as a business, and we think that only happens when everything around us and everyone around us is succeeding as well. And the other point that sort of goes with that is we're very driven by the science and the facts. So we're more focused on the engineering and the science. So I'm an engineer by background, so I was happy to see engineers in leadership roles. So that's really what drives our approach and thinking is the science and the math and the numbers.
Wonderful. Thank you all for those introductions. So it sounds like circularity is really ingrained just throughout what your organizations are doing or what your industry is focused on, whether it's like the renewable input or making products or kind of buying products that can be recovered and recirculated. So next, I wanted to focus a little bit on the beginning of life for some of the models that we talked about, maybe starting with Kevin, and then after I'll jump to Emmanuel. But I think I want to talk a little bit about agriculture, and I think as we know, agriculture has been growing, a growing part of the conversation at COP. Tomorrow, I believe, is Agriculture and Food Day. And this year we've seen a declaration on sustainable agriculture and food and climate action, which I believe has been signed by over 130 countries. So this is definitely something that's getting a lot more attention in these discussions. And Kevin, ag is an important part of your value chain, the value chain of Mars. When folks talk about agriculture, it's often about regenerative agriculture, and you mentioned the net zero roadmap. In that roadmap, it's called climate smart agriculture, and you don't show the greenhouse gas benefits from carbon sequestration on farm. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, to give a bit of background, and going quite literally off the title of the panel. So when we look at our business from a materials perspective, most of the materials flowing through our business are raw materials, agricultural materials ending up as food. There is, of course, also some packaging and other things like that, but on a tonnage basis, most of it is agriculture. And of course, that is circular almost by definition from a carbon point of view. You know, all the food you put in your mouth, most of it you end up exhaling that carbon, and somewhere a plant can pull that carbon back down, and so that part of it is kind of okay. The problem is the energy bits that go along with that material flow, right? So the energy to produce the fertilizer, the energy on farm, the energy of processing, and then some of the other chemistry that happens around things turning into methane or nitrous oxides from fertilizer emissions. And so the work we've done is, although there's a lot of discussion about energy, you know, somewhere between a quarter and third of global GHG emissions are not from the energy sector. They're from the, you know, land and food sectors. And so that sort of says, oh, well, that's not really an energy transition discussion. That's an agriculture or a land use discussion. But when you actually crawl into those numbers, a non-trivial part of it is actually still energy. And so, you know, when we talk about climate smart agriculture in our net zero roadmap, we really talk about three ideas there. So one is regenerative agriculture, which is everyone's darling at the moment, and it's very exciting, and we talk about soil carbon, and it's great, and it's necessary, but quantitatively is not actually that important. The opportunity to sequester carbon in soil is modest. Worth chasing, important for many co-benefits, but it's fairly modest. So for us, climate smart agriculture is doing that work, but it's also doing just, you know, some would maybe say boring. My energy efficiency friend would refute this, and I would agree with them, just low carbon farming, right? So electrifying farms, replacing that, you know, diesel tractor with an electric tractor, replacing the irrigation pumps with solar power, getting into the supply chain of the fertilizer and replacing the natural gas with other alternatives. And that low carbon farming is actually where we think the biggest opportunity to drive GHG reductions, and that actually leans into this energy transition discussion. And then the other part of climate smart ag for us is climate resilience. So clearly we need to work on reducing our footprint, but we're already experiencing some of the consequences of climate change. And so pretending like we're not going to have to adapt and adjust would be sort of foolish at this point. And so that's why we do work on regenerative agriculture, but our bigger focus is this climate smart ag. And really we think some of the biggest opportunities are actually in the energy space related to farm, but you have to dig a couple layers to get to the energy bit of that challenge.
Wonderful, thank you for that. I think it's great to see just such a holistic and realistic approach to the agriculture side of things. And I know I think it seems like it's clear that you are not only approaching the impact of agriculture, but also how that contributes to the larger building up the circular economy. And I think now maybe shifting back over to Emmanuel, I think excited to hear a little bit more about bioindustrials. Like you said, Cargill operates in a bunch of different sectors within agriculture, one of those being bioindustrials. So could you just provide a little bit of insight into how bio-based products are contributing to advancing circularity and sustainability?
Definitely. And I'll actually briefly come back to what Kevin
Please.
was mentioning before. So I think at Cargill we do agree that that circularity approach starts at farmland, starts with agriculture. So the agriculture, we are requiring farmers to grow much more biomass to serve different market outlets. And in order to do so, we need really to work alongside farmers in order to improve their performance, to improve productivity, reduce cost, but also offer risk management solutions, offer education, offer trainings. So I think when you look at the circularity approach, you need to have this holistic approach that starts with farmers, it starts with agriculture. And that's the reason why the vision that Cargill has is to make regenerative agriculture a commonplace across our supply chains. Because the aim is really positioning agriculture as part of the solution. Now, looking at the bioeconomy, agriculture is definitely part of it. Looking at the circularity, agriculture is part of it, as well as food and feed. And definitely, they are all part of this circular bioeconomy in which a company as Cargill is collaborating with different stakeholders in order to achieve those objectives. So the first thing that I want to say, what we need to increase the circularity for bio-based products is a partnership approach. And I'll give you an example. In Europe, we have a public-private partnership. Cargill is part of a consortium in which actually you have at the same location a Cargill biorefinery and then a mycoprotein actually biorefinery. So you are producing at the same location food-grade proteins that are very much driving the market demands from consumers that they want plant-based proteins, and then at the same time you are also producing biofuels. So you see that the synergies and the circularity approach comes from the fact that you are looking holistically at the agro-food supply chain. Then going towards really industrial and fuel application, I think you don't look at bio-based chemistry in isolation. You look at it in coordination with traditional chemistry. For example, what we are doing at the Schiphol airport, also in Amsterdam, that aims to be one of the most sustainable airports in the world, we are actually providing an additive that is for asphalt that increases the recycling and the recuperation of asphalt, for example, for the airport. So the message is, in order to activate the circularity approach, you need to look at the whole supply chain and how you can serve different markets at the same time.
Wonderful. I appreciate you bringing in partnerships. I think if we have time at the end, I have another partnership-related question that I wanted to bring in. But Kolya, I wonder so we've talked about the beginning of life for kind of these agriculture related sectors. Could you talk a little bit about how the industries that you're working with, how just the sustainability and circularity of the materials, kind of the beginning of life focus?
Yeah, thank you. Give me 2 minutes to talk about synergies a little bit.
Please.
And let me explain to you why we would expand the synergies of energy and materials into the agricultural topics as well.
Sounds wonderful.
So one of the things that we have been supporting with our clients, with our members of E5, was the development of an alternative material to steel and steel reinforced concrete. And this could be used as a fallback because it is carbon negative in the end of the life cycle. We have proven in a project with Airbus and Technical University of Munich that carbon fibers can be produced from biomass. In this case, it was algae oil. So Airbus is very much interested in using carbon fibers in the future that have a clean footprint. And we derived algae oil from algae farming, turned via some processes, chemical processes, these these algae oils into polyacrylnitrile, and at the end of the day, the characteristics of the carbon fiber that we generated from that had exactly the same characteristics as they were made from fossil oils. The other component that we use to stabilize the carbon fiber is granite. Granite is available in abundance on a stone planet like the Earth. It's much more available than limestone. And so we can really say here that we have an ultimate limitless resource that Mother Earth has taken already for long times, which is much more performant in pressure stability than concrete. So in combination, as I can show here, this is made from carbon fibers and granite. This material is 2 times to 4 times more performant than existing building materials. So with this development, we cannot replace steel and cement from today to tomorrow, but it could become a major fallback if we don't reach our targets, taking into account that a lot of CCS needs to be driven to bring CO2 emissions from the cement sector into Earth. The other point is that we discovered in a German-funded project that these granites we are using, and it's the stone dust, is very well suitable for weathering. And that can be used in agriculture as well. And together with biochar in this project, it will be analyzed in how far the fertilization of soil and the capabilities of that soil to capture lots amount of CO2 over long term can contribute to getting rid of artificial fertilizers that are very CO2 intensive. So I would expand the whole discussion of materials and energy and agriculture, and to see it in a holistic way and create these synergies that may be possible.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for those insights. We have our final panelist who's joined us. Thank you for welcome, Helen. Yes, of course. So quick little recap. We just did introductions, talked a little bit about the organizations that we're representing and their role in the circular economy. So I'm going to ask you to do that in a second.
I'll catch up.
Perfect.
Okay. Sorry, we were food loss and wasting, which is kind of a little bit of a forgotten, anyway. Okay, moving on. So I work for Trane Technologies. Trane Technologies is the largest heating and cooling provider in the world. We also ship in our containers more than 60% of fresh and frozen food. We span very low temperatures to very high temperatures, so pharmaceutical processing as well as shipping. So, you know, if you think about the vaccines, and then, you know, all the way up to industrial processing. So if somebody says it can't be decarbonized, we either build it or buy it and do it. And we, you know, hit all our targets and have our net zero goals and report through CDP. So, including, we have goals around, have we talked about scope 1, 2, and 3? Have we gotten there yet?
We have not.
All right, let's
Take
get
it away.
nerdy. Okay, so, you know, scope 1 and 2 is kind of what happens at my manufacturing facility. How do I decarbonize that? Scope 3 is what happens in other places, right, in the value chain. You know, certainly, you know, kind of a more familiar feel to doing work around greenhouse gas emissions and climate is to kind of look at our own supply chains and look inside our house, right? So, so if we think about steel, that's the biggest raw material that we purchase. We make a lot of equipment, frankly. So net zero steel has been a really important part of our decarbonization program, even though from our largest our largest emissions are from our customers' use of our equipment for heating and cooling. But we still think it's really important to do the right work at home. So we do purchase net zero steel in Europe, and we do purchase low carbon steel in the U.S. And we are working with our suppliers to kind of help them develop their processes and supply chains to get there. And we think that's just really important work to help us to reach our targets for 2030.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. So I want to segue the conversation a little bit into looking at the intersection of technology and circularity. We'll turn to Kevin next. Are there any advancements in technology that you see as being able to, I guess looking forward, being able to contribute to just the circularity of some of the key impact areas that you at Mars are experiencing?
Yeah, so I've talked a lot about agriculture, but I think for a business like Mars that sells consumer packaged goods, people probably expect me to talk about our packaging in the context of circularity. That's the usual topic, but again, being the good engineer, I wanted to lead with the major material flow. But when we come to packaging, certainly we've done work over many decades to reduce and lightweight our packaging. And the unfortunate thing about that, particularly with our plastic packaging, is all the things we've done to drive material efficiency break the economics of a recycling system, right? Because there's so little material there that the value of that material to anyone is incredibly low, and so therefore the business case for catching it and going out and doing anything with it is not great. And so one of the technologies that we're quite bullish on is what's often called advanced recycling, which is going a step further back in the recycling process. So instead of sort of mechanically separating, grinding up, and melting and reforming, you actually go a step further back through pyrolysis and take a mixed collection of plastics closer back to the feedstocks that are used traditionally from a fossil source to make those plastics. And so we think for thin films, lightweight, flexible materials like ours, that's a real technology breakthrough that's coming to scale that will make a difference. In addition to that, we are in many cases going sort of back to it's not really back to the future, I guess it's back to the past, where we're going from plastic back to paper or biomaterial based packaging. But yeah, advanced recycling is something that we think is pretty compelling from a technology point of view. It's a real unlocker.
Absolutely. Kolya, I want to ask the same question, similar question, I guess, to you. Are there any innovations or technologies that you see as being able to make a real difference looking forward for your industry or your members?
Yes, we have developed 3 different programs together with the German government to actually apply these materials in applications. So one of the applications is building a supporting structure in a rotor blade for wind turbines. From this material, replacing plastics and glass fiber and carbon fibers alone, because the stone has incredible elastic properties that have been commonly unknown so far. Then in the second program, we are developing a CO2 neutral and even CO2 negative house wall concept consisting of stone, carbon fibers, and biochar as insulation material. And in the third project, we are developing a railway sleeper to keep the rail tracks from steel in form. Today they are built from cement and steel, and the sleepers can be also made from granite and carbon fibers. As well as a bridge, a pedestrian bridge that is going to be built within the next 1.5 years, purely from carbon fibers and stone. And the other project, the last project we are have been working on is replacement of steel in concrete, because the cementous milieu is going to be probably very pH with a low pH value, and steel will rust very easily. And putting this material as a replacement instead of steel into the concrete structures, and also in the renovation of concrete structures, could solve the rusting problem of steel.
Oh, it sounds like a lot of really interesting innovations are happening.
Yes.
Emmanuel, are there any? You talked a little bit about bioindustrials. That's pretty, I think, just innovative and exciting. But are there any other circular solutions that Cargill has been pursuing or is thinking about?
Yeah, Well, yeah, maybe one connection that I haven't made, it's definitely in the fuel and the energy space, because we do also supply bioenergy market outlets, both bioethanol, biodiesel, but also biogas most recently. So we see a lot of synergies also in this space. We have recently launched also our first waste-based biodiesel plant in Belgium, in Ghent. So definitely across also industrial and fuel, there are a lot of synergies where you can actually serve at the same time the energy and the industrial outlets together. Yes, so.
Very cool. And then Helen, same question to you.
Sure.
What kind of innovations and advancements are you excited about in your industry?
So certainly this net zero steel is very exciting and innovative. And I'm going to talk about, if you don't mind, I'm going to talk about something very basic.
Please.
To get to net carbon steel, one helpful tool in the toolkit is recycling that steel, right? So bring it back and put it back in, right? Not enough steel is recycled. And so that, that reverse supply chain is going to be something that we all need a whole lot more of to kind of help us with that journey. The other thing, again, it's not exciting innovation, but it's more basic than that, but it's so problematic. The recovery of refrigerants at the end of life from equipment. And I would say that our industry does a fabulous job of that in big buildings with those larger charge sizes, with teeny little equipment like someone might make a refrigerator and you'll trade it in for a white good trade up, but and so that'll be disposed of properly. But if I think about kind of the medium-sized equipment in somebody's home, a lot of times that refrigerant doesn't make it back to where it should and it's released. And those are very high potent greenhouse gases. And so if you can invent a way to get people to do what they're supposed to, I think that I would pay you for that. No. Anyway, there are a lot of exciting, innovative technologies that around this space. And I think that we're going to see more. I think we're going to see more collectively as a world around kind of looking at critical minerals and like, can we regain them and reuse them? I think that all of those things are on the table as we look at, kind of advancing for climate.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm not sure if this will be our last question, but potentially. I want to make sure we get a chance to talk about policy. Maybe just to kind of lay the foundation for the policy question. Embedding a circular economy approach within climate action is about delivering really a whole system transformation, just of how we produce and how we consume. And I think recently we've heard a growing number of calls for a full systematic change rather than just singular one-off solutions. In the September Global Stocktake document, there were several mentions of the need for systems transformation and calls for an all-of-economy, all-of-society approach to climate action. So that's very encouraging, but of course there's still a lot of work to do to just figure out what that looks like with regard to COP and beyond and on smaller scales. So maybe with that said, Emmanuel, I'm going to go to you first. Looking at the policy landscape, either globally or on a more regional basis, what are some of the key levers that you see as essential to driving the deployment and integration of circular practices?
Thank you, Jamaica. This is a very pertinent question for me, I guess. Well, I think what the message that I try to convey today is that we need to have this holistic approach. And I think in policy we are not doing that. So when you look at the innovation that we are talking about today, that Helen has been talking about, Collier has been talking about the innovation, the new market demands, we need to have an holistic approach, and I will give you a concrete example. Let's say, if beside your animal proteins, you want to eat more plant-based proteins, so this is like new trends, new market demands. In order to do so, when you are to produce proteins, you are going to produce also carbs. But then when you look at the diets that are changing, eventually your food customers, like for example Mars, eventually they are trying to get their diets a little bit less sugars. So you want to do more proteins, but we are going to end up with more carbs that eventually your food customers are not very much interested in. But actually they are the perfect building blocks for industrial applications. So having this holistic approach in policy, and don't break out this silos approach, don't look at food, feed, industrial and fuel outlets in isolation. I think it's key. And then the second element, it's really the collaboration. So how policy can create and enable opportunities for synergies across industries. So how we can work together with policymakers in order to make sure that we create this enabling policy framework.
Thank you so much. So I think we have about 45 seconds per person on this policy question. So I'm going to start with Helen. What are some policy solutions you see as key?
Yeah, I think what I see is that if it was easy, we'd be doing it, right? And so I think it's really important to kind of understand the why tree of the problems and go after those, and take a ride backwards through your supply chain. Find out where everything ends up at the end of life to help you envision, and I would say policymakers too, to help you envision what the solutions are.
Thank you. Cool, yeah. 45 seconds.
Okay. So, yeah, I think recycling, this is no question, this is not a big discussion, that we should recycle as much as possible. But the IPCC also tells us that if we do not take care about carbon dioxide removal, which is kind of recycling from the past, we need to include this into our policies. We need it to make our targets. And this is part of the project we are working in that was financed by the German government, this so-called CDR Terra project, where 10 different methods of CDR methods are being
I'm going to have to cut you off. Thank
analyzed.
you so much, though. And Kevin, to close this out, you have about 30 seconds.
A few more than that. So,
I have to close.
So I think for a long time the EU led on climate and energy policy. The US, I think, has now jumped in front with the IRA and all the others. And so I think there's a very productive race to the top going on globally on energy and climate policy. And so it needs to keep going, but I think that's encouraging. I think on circularity, we're a little more stuck. There's a lot of waste infrastructure that doesn't exist in the world, and it's not clear how that gets built. And so I think it'd be great to figure out how to get that spinning up in the way that energy and climate policy is.
Wonderful. All right, that brings us to the end of the discussion. Thank you, everyone, so much. As we've heard today, a circular economy approach can really work hand in hand with the energy transition, and thank you for laying that out, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamaica.